But I am now also the only 20-year-old in the whole of the UK that the Chancellor is prepared to help with housing.
I felt it was an opportunity to set the tone.
We now have one of the most uncaring, uncompromising and out-of-touch governments that the UK has seen since Thatcher.
So I thought, no, I'm going for it. Don't care who gets uncomfortable by it.
All these speeches have served to do is to demonstrate how deep the lack of understanding about Scotland is.
This isn't about kilts and Braveheart and shortbread. This is about people's lives.
It is together with all the parties on these benches that we must form an opposition.
Do you know you're on the 10 o'clock news tonight? And I was like, what did I do?
Ultimately, people are needing a voice. People are needing help. Let's give them it.
The year is 2015 and I'm about to make my maiden speech in Parliament. Entering Parliament at that age was unexpected for starters. You know, I always knew it was a possibility, but I didn't think there was a likelihood of it. So once the election happened, there was no real rest period. You know, immediately that's you're in there on the Monday morning. So there was no real time to breathe. So I suppose it was overwhelming going into Parliament. The first time I walked into the chamber, it was just that moment of, yeah, right, this is real, cool. Where am I going to be sitting? I mean, going into Parliament, because I believe in Scottish independence, my opinion already wasn't particularly high of Westminster, but I suppose it was disappointing and quite shocking to see that it was actually worse than I expected in a lot of ways. That there was quite often times where the tradition would get in the way of doing what I thought we were there to do.
Firstly, in my maiden speech, I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Douglas Alexander. He served the constituency for many years. After all, I was only 3 when he was elected. But it is because of that fact that I want to thank him for all he did for the constituency, and I especially want to take a moment to commend him for the dignified way that he handled himself on what must have been a very difficult election night. He did himself proud and he did his party proud, and I wish him the best for the future. Now, when I discovered that it was of tradition to speak about the history of your constituency in a maiden speech, I decided to do some research, despite the fact I've lived there all my life. And as one of the tail end doing the maiden speech of my colleagues in the SNP, I've noticed that my colleagues quite often mention Robbie a lot, and they all try to form this intrinsic connection between him and their own constituency and own him for themselves. I, however, feel no need to do this, for during my research I discovered a fact which trumps them all. William Wallace was born in my constituency.
I'm actually proud that I managed to soften it a little bit, you know, because I think I got in some rubbish patter about William Wallace or something, because I remember I was sitting listening to all of these maiden speeches and everybody was talking about Robbie Burns this and da, da, da. I thought, I just don't care. So I had to dig deep in order to try and lighten a little bit of the speech, because I knew if I just go in guns a-blazing, nobody's going to listen. You know, you need to take a room with you. So that's how I thought, I'll start gentle and then lead into the serious stuff. So that was the hardest part of the speech, to be honest with you. If I remember right, the one thing that I really was nervous about was I was desperate not to sound sarcastic, particularly when I was talking about my predecessor, because I genuinely meant what I was saying. It was just, I don't know, when I would practice it with people who knew me, they would burst out laughing. And I was like, no, I don't want you to laugh. I'm being serious.
But the truth is that within my constituency, it's not all fantastic. We've watched our town centres deteriorate. We've watched our communities decline. Our unemployment level is higher than that of the UK average. 1 in 5 children in my constituency go to bed hungry at night. Paisley Job Centre has the 3rd highest number of sanctions in the whole of Scotland. Now, before I was elected, I volunteered for a charitable organisation, and there was a gentleman who I grew very fond of. He was one of these guys who has been battered by life in every way imaginable. You name it, he's been through it. And he used to come in to get food from this charity. And it was the only food that he had access to, and it was the only meal he would get. And I sat with him and he told me about his fear of going to the job centre. He said, I've heard the stories, Mhairi. They try and trick you out. They'll tell you you're a liar. I'm not a liar, Mhairi, I'm not. And I told him, it's okay, calm down. Go, be honest, it'll be fine.
So I do remember when I was sitting back and watching and asking people, you know, what's a maiden speech supposed to be like? You know, what do you cover in it? And overwhelmingly people were telling me, oh, it's to be light-hearted and it's to be about, you know, your constituency. It can be very tongue-in-cheek, almost, you know, pantomime-esque, as one person put it. But I've immediately thought, no, I'm not here to joke about or to have flowery, you know, the banter with people. I'm here to do a job, so let's set the tone right immediately.
I then didn't see him for about 2 or 3 weeks. I did get very worried. And when he finally did come back in, I says to him, how did you get on? And without saying a word, he burst into tears. That grown man standing in front of a 20-year-old crying his eyes out. Because what had happened to him was the money that he would normally use to pay for his travel to come to the charity to get his food, he decided that in order to afford to get to the job centre, he would save that money. Because of this, he didn't eat for 5 days. He didn't drink. When he was on the bus on the way to the job centre, he fainted due to exhaustion and dehydration. He was 15 minutes late for the job centre and he was sanctioned for 13 weeks. Now, when the Chancellor spoke in his budget about fixing the roof while the sun is shining, I would have to ask, on who is the sun shining?
So I felt it was my duty to, if I'm here to represent a constituency, then I need to tell people what's going on in the constituency and why people are so unhappy and why people have voted differently than they normally have, and also why folk have been willing to put their faith in a 20-year-old. You know, it's because of all the things that I've been arguing for. So no, I felt it was an opportunity, like I say, to set the tone. So I thought, no, I'm going for it. Don't care who gets uncomfortable by it.
Now, the government, quite rightly, pays for me through taxpayers' money to be able to live in London whilst I serve my constituents. My housing is subsidised by the taxpayer. Now, the Chancellor in his budget said, it is not fair that families earning over £40,000 in London should have their rents paid for by other working people. But it is okay so long as you're an MP. Yeah. In this budget, the Chancellor also abolished any housing benefit for anyone below the age of 21. So we are now in the ridiculous situation whereby, because I am an MP, not only am I the youngest, but I am now also the only 20-year-old in the whole of the UK that the Chancellor is prepared to help with housing.
I think it struck a chord with a lot of people because they recognised what I was talking about, whether it be their own lives or whether it be their next door neighbour or a family member or a friend or whatever. It felt like I was stating the obvious, to be honest, but it seemed that I was the only one doing it, or it felt like I was the only one doing it then.
Here.
It is here that I must now turn to those who I share a bench with. Now, I have sat in this chamber for 10 weeks, and I have very deliberately stayed quiet and I have listened intently to everything that has been said. I have heard multiple speeches from Labour benches standing to talk about the worrying rise of nationalism in Scotland, when in actual fact all these speeches have served to do is to demonstrate how deep the lack of understanding about Scotland is within the Labour Party.
Certainly within the SNP there are elements of folk who feel a real sense of civic nationalism. You know, they're proud to be Scottish and everything, whereas I think I'm more like the majority of the people who voted yes, in that we're not ashamed or anything, but it's not there's more important things, certainly politically, to be concerned about. And for me, and for so many others, it was the democratic deficit that we felt. You know, Scotland's not voted Conservative since 1955, and yet we've overwhelmingly had Conservative governments that we've not elected. So I think that was the key misunderstanding at the time, was this isn't about kilts and Braveheart and shortbread. This is about people's lives and wanting to have the ability to get rid of governments that are damaging and hurting them.
I, like so many SNP members, come from a traditional socialist Labour family, and I have never been quiet in my assertion that I feel it is the Labour Party that left me, not the other way about. The SNP did not triumph on a wave of nationalism. In fact, nationalism has nothing to do with what's happened in Scotland. We triumphed on a wave of hope, Hope that there was something different, something better to the Thatcherite neoliberal policies that are produced from this chamber. Hope that representatives genuinely could give a voice to those who don't have one.
Specifically, I suppose I'm talking about everything that the Labour Party did, I suppose, particularly from Tony Blair's leadership, but I suppose it's arguably started before then. But I suppose abandoning, collective ownership, abandoning being against war, abandoning abolishing the House of Lords, abandoning giving Scotland more powers. I just felt that the Labour Party had forgotten their roots, essentially, and the roots that so many people in Scotland identify with. And, I was one of many who felt almost politically homeless because the Labour Party wasn't arguing for the things that we wanted. They were taking us into illegal wars. They were, sounding more and more like the Conservatives. So it was genuinely the reason why there was such a change in Scotland. So it only felt sensible and honest to say it.
Tony Benn once said that in politics there are weathercocks and signposts. Weathercocks will spin in whatever direction the wind of public opinion may blow them, no matter what principle they have to compromise. And then there are signposts, signposts which stand true and tall and principled, and they point in a direction and they say, this is the way to a better society, and it is my job to convince you why. Tony Benn was right when he said the only people worth remembering in politics were signposts. Tony
Benn was a major influence on me, not just because of his values and the things that he argued, but also the manner in which he went about it. He was never afraid of shying away from a debate or anything. And equally, those debates can be very forthright, but they don't have to be shouting matches. And I was really attracted by his commitment to just educating people, and that's what, certainly when I was getting involved in politics throughout the Scottish referendum, that was the thing that really gripped me, was we need to educate people about the state of politics and why this stuff matters. Yes, we will have political differences. Yes, in other parliaments we may be opposing parties, but within this chamber we are not. No matter how much I may wish it, the SNP is not the sole opposition to this government, but nor is the Labour Party. It is together with all the parties on these benches that we must form an opposition. And in order to be effective, we must oppose, not abstain. So I reach out a genuine hand of friendship, which I can only hope will be taken. Let us come together. Let us be that opposition. Let us be that signpost of a better society. Ultimately, people are needing a voice. People are needing help. Let's give them it. I remember, folk coming to me and going, do you know you're trending second on Twitter? What are you talking about? And I was going, do you know you're on the 10 o'clock news tonight? And I was like, what did I do? And it's clips of the speech. So no, I didn't expect the level of attention I got. In hindsight, I can understand it a little bit more, especially given that it certainly felt like the media were just waiting for me to mess up. They were salivating at the idea of it. And the fact that I had stayed quiet for those 10 weeks in Parliament only, I suppose, ramped up the excitement for them, that eventually, I think there was a lot of folk hoping that I would be a damp squib, and or they would be able to tear it apart and go, look at this child in here, no talent whatsoever. So when it turned out to be the opposite, I think that was just as surprising, for lots of folk who were paying attention. When I look back, I'm proud of myself for delivering it and, writing it and being able to get through it, without any real mistakes or mishaps. And I suppose I'm quite saddened by how much of it is still true. Even 10 years on, not enough has changed, and certainly not changing quick enough. Since 2015, things have got markedly worse, definitely. Brexit has played a massive role in that. I think I would say the same thing. I think the only way you can deliver real change is by bringing people with you and by standing your ground about what kind of society you want to see happen and what you're prepared to do to get it. So no, I think, like you say, the topics are all the same: poverty, housing, independence. So yeah, no, I'd probably keep it all the same.